The gunshot echoed through the canyon just as Eliza Montgomery's stagecoach rounded the bend into Redemption Springs, Arizona territory, and she knew in that instant that her carefully constructed life in Boston was about to shatter like glass against stone. The horses reared and screamed, their hooves pawing at the dust-choked air as the driver cursed and yanked on the reins. Eliza braced herself against the wooden seat, her gloved hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles went white beneath the fabric. Through the small window, she could see riders approaching, their faces obscured by bandanas, their intentions clear in the way they brandished their revolvers toward the sky. "Stand and deliver," one of them shouted, and Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, sending up a cloud of red dust that filtered through the cracks in the doors. Eliza pressed herself back against the seat, her mind racing through possibilities. She had left Boston 3 weeks ago with nothing but 2 trunks of belongings and a letter that had changed everything. The letter sat in her reticule now, creased from being read and reread. The words burned into her memory. "Your aunt has passed. The ranch is yours if you want it. If not, it will be sold at auction. You have 60 days. She had not expected bandits. She had not expected gunfire. She had certainly not expected to die in the Arizona desert before she even saw the property that was supposedly her inheritance. The door jerked open and a man with cold gray eyes peered inside. "Out," he commanded, gesturing with his pistol. Eliza lifted her chin, summoning every ounce of the Montgomery pride her mother had instilled in her since childhood. She would not cower. She stepped down from the coach, her traveling dress immediately collecting dust at the hem, and stood beside the driver, who had his hands raised above his head. "We do not have much," the driver said, his voice shaking slightly. "Just passengers and mail." "We will be the judge of that," the gray-eyed man said. He looked Eliza up and down, taking in her fine dress, her jewelry, the obvious marks of wealth and breeding. "You will hand over that necklace and those rings, miss?" Eliza's hand went to her throat, where her mother's pearl necklace rested against her skin. It was all she had left of her family, all she had carried across the country. "Please," she said, and hated the tremor in her voice. "It was my mother's." "I do not care if it was the Queen of England's," the bandit said, stepping closer. "Hand it over, or—" The crack of a rifle split the air, and the bandit stumbled backward, his hat flying off his head. Another shot followed, then another, coming from somewhere up in the rocks above the road. The bandits scattered, shouting to each other, returning fire toward the unseen shooter. Eliza dropped to the ground, covering her head with her arms, the dirt pressing against her cheek as bullets whined overhead. It lasted perhaps 2 minutes, though it felt like hours. When the shooting stopped, the silence was almost more terrifying than the noise had been. Eliza remained frozen, her breath coming in short gasps, until she heard the sound of boots approaching. "You can get up now, miss. They're gone." The voice was low and rough, tinged with an accent she could not quite place. Eliza raised her head cautiously and found herself looking at a pair of worn leather boots, then up past dusty denim trousers, a gun belt slung low on narrow hips, a faded red shirt, and finally a face that made something in her chest twist unexpectedly. He was young, probably no more than 26 or 27, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey in lamplight. Dark hair fell across his forehead from beneath his hat, and there was a small scar along his jaw that gave him a dangerous look despite the concern in his expression. "Are you hurt?" he asked, extending a hand to help her up. Eliza took it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip as he pulled her to her feet. "No," she managed. "No, I am not hurt. Thank you. You saved our lives." He shrugged, as if running off armed bandits was something he did every day. "Just happened to be riding this way. Name is Cole Harrison. I have a ranch about 5 miles from here." "Eliza Montgomery," she said, brushing dust from her dress with shaking hands. "I am traveling to Redemption Springs." Something flickered in Cole's eyes at the name, but it was gone before she could identify it. Redemption Springs is just over that ridge, he said, pointing. About 2 miles. But those bandits might come back with reinforcements. I will ride with you the rest of the way, if that is acceptable to you and the driver. The driver, who had been checking the horses, nodded vigorously. More than acceptable. Mister, we are grateful for the help. Cole swung himself up onto a paint horse that had been waiting patiently nearby, and the small caravan started moving again. Eliza settled back into the coach, but she found herself unable to stop glancing out the window at the man riding alongside them. There was something about him, something in the way he sat his horse and scanned the landscape that spoke of hard-won experience, and a life lived on the edge of danger. Redemption Springs appeared on the horizon like a mirage, shimmering in the afternoon heat. It was smaller than Eliza had imagined, just one main street with buildings clustered on either side. A general store, a saloon, a hotel, a blacksmith, a church with a white steeple pointing toward the endless blue sky. People stopped what they were doing to watch as the stagecoach rolled in, their faces curious and guarded in equal measure. Cole dismounted when the coach stopped in front of the hotel and opened the door for Eliza. "Welcome to Redemption Springs," he said. "It is not much, but the people are decent for the most part." "I am looking for a ranch," Eliza said, accepting his hand as she stepped down. "The Double M Ranch. It belonged to my aunt, Margaret Montgomery." Cole's expression changed, softening with what looked like genuine sorrow. "Miss Margaret passed about 2 months ago," he said quietly. "I am sorry for your loss. She was a good woman, one of the best." "You knew her?" "Everyone knew Miss Margaret. She was practically the heart of this town." Cole paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "The Double M borders my ranch, the Lazy H. We helped each other out when needed. Miss Margaret, she used to keep wildflowers on her table. Said they brightened up the place, made it feel like a home instead of just a house." Something about the way he said it made Eliza's throat tight. She had not seen her aunt in 15 years, not since she was a girl of 10, and her mother had taken her back to Boston after a summer visit. But she remembered a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, a woman who had shown her how to ride a horse and pick wildflowers from the meadow. "I would like to see the ranch," Eliza said. "Is it far?" "About an hour's ride. I can take you there tomorrow if you like. It is getting late now, and you will want to rest after your journey." Cole touched the brim of his hat. "I will be at the saloon if you need anything. The hotel here is run by Mrs. Chen. She'll take good care of you." He started to walk away, leading his horse toward the livery, but Eliza found herself calling after him. "Mr. Harrison?" He turned back, his eyes meeting hers, and again she felt that strange twist in her chest. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it from dangerous to something softer, something that made her pulse quicken. "My pleasure, Miss Montgomery. I will see you tomorrow." Eliza watched him go, then turned to face the hotel. Mrs. Chen turned out to be a small, efficient woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She showed Eliza to a room on the second floor, helped arrange for her trunks to be brought up, and promised hot water for a bath within the hour. "You are Margaret's niece," Mrs. Chen said, and it was not a question. "You look like her. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. Did you know her well?" "As well as anyone, I suppose. She kept to herself mostly, worked that ranch like a man. People respected her for it, even if they thought she was peculiar." "Mrs." Chen smoothed the blanket on the bed with practiced hands. "She talked about you sometimes, said she wrote to you in Boston, invited you to visit." Guilt twisted in Eliza's stomach. "My mother did not think it was appropriate. She wanted me to marry well, to move in the right social circles. A ranch in Arizona territory did not fit into those plans." "And did you? Marry well?" Eliza laughed, a short, bitter sound. "No, I did not marry at all. My mother died last year, and I realized I had spent my entire life living according to her expectations. When the lawyer's letter came about the ranch, I saw it as a chance to finally make my own choices." Mrs. Chen nodded, her expression approving. Margaret would have liked that. She was all about making her own choices, consequences be damned. Your bath will be ready soon. Alone in the room, Eliza stood at the window and looked out at the town. It was so different from Boston. From the crowded streets and tall buildings and constant noise. Here the sky seemed to stretch on forever, and the silence was broken only by the occasional voice or the sound of horses. She thought about Cole Harrison, about the way he had appeared like something out of a dime novel to rescue her from the bandits. She thought about his words regarding her aunt and the wildflowers. That night, Eliza dreamed of a ranch she had not seen in 15 years, of a woman with kind eyes, and of a cowboy with whiskey-colored eyes who looked at her as if she were something precious and unexpected. Morning came with the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of coffee drifting up from the hotel dining room. Eliza dressed carefully, choosing her most practical traveling outfit, and went downstairs to find Cole Harrison already waiting for her, his hat in his hands. "Good morning, Miss Montgomery," he said, standing as she approached. "I took the liberty of arranging for a horse for you, unless you would prefer a wagon." "A horse is fine," Eliza said, pleased that he had not assumed she could not ride. "I learned when I was young, though it has been some years since I've been in a saddle." "It will come back to you," Cole assured her. "Like most things worth knowing, you do not really forget." They rode out of town together as the sun climbed higher in the sky, turning the desert landscape into shades of gold and rust and red. Cole pointed out landmarks as they went, telling her about the territory, the challenges of ranching in such harsh country, the delicate balance between drought and flood that could make or break a season. "Your aunt, she understood this land," he said as they rode. "A lot of people come out here from back east thinking they can just apply the same methods they used in greener country, but it does not work that way. The land here requires respect, patience, and a willingness to adapt." "Is that why you are still here?" Eliza asked, "and when so many others have failed?" Cole was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I came here 6 years ago with nothing but a horse and a dream. I worked on other people's ranches, saved every penny, learned everything I could. When the Lazy H came up for sale, your aunt helped me secure the loan. She did not have to do that. She barely knew me, but she said she saw something in me, some kind of determination that reminded her of herself when she was younger. She was always kind," Eliza said softly. "Even when I was a child, I remember that about her." They crested a rise, and Cole pulled his horse to a stop. "There," he said, pointing. "The double M." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. The ranch spread out before them in a valley, nestled between rocky hills. There was a house, larger than she had expected, built of adobe with a covered porch that wrapped around the front. Outbuildings clustered nearby. A barn, a stable, a bunkhouse, corrals where horses moved lazily in the morning sun, and everywhere she could see signs of neglect, the way things had started to fall apart without Margaret there to maintain them. They rode down the slope and dismounted in front of the house. The door was unlocked, and it swung open with a creak that echoed through the empty rooms. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that fell through the windows. The furniture was still in place, covered with sheets, and everywhere there were small touches that spoke of Margaret's personality. Books on shelves, paintings on walls, a rocking chair by the fireplace. And on the kitchen table, in a glass vase, there were wildflowers. They were dried and brittle now, their colors faded, but someone had placed them there with care. "I kept putting them there," Cole said from behind her, his voice rough. "After she passed. I know it seems foolish, but I could not stand the thought of the table being empty. She always had flowers, always. She said they were hope made visible, a reminder that even in the harshest desert, beautiful things could grow." Eliza turned to face him, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart stutter. It was not just grief for her aunt. It was something deeper, something that had to do with her, with this moment, with the way the light fell through the windows and illuminated the dust and the dried flowers and the possibility of new beginnings. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you keep bringing flowers for a house that was empty? Cole took a step closer and another, until they were standing near enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Because I kept hoping, he said, hoping that someone would come walking through that door who would understand what this place meant, who would see its beauty instead of its flaws, hoping that Miss Margaret's legacy would not just be sold off to the highest bidder and forgotten. You were hoping for me, Eliza said, understanding dawning, even though you did not know me. I knew about you. Miss Margaret talked about her niece in Boston, the girl she had taught to ride horses, the girl who sent her letters even when her mother discouraged it. She hoped you would come back someday, that you would fall in love with this land the way she had. Cole reached out slowly, giving Eliza every chance to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. And maybe I kept those flowers on the table because some part of me was hoping too. Hoping that when you finally came walking through that door, you would be someone worth knowing. Eliza could not breathe. No one had ever looked at her the way Cole Harrison was looking at her now, as if she were both a question and an answer, as if her very presence had changed something fundamental in his world. The men in Boston had looked at her inheritance, her family name, her social connections. Cole was looking at her, just her, and seeing something that made him willing to keep putting flowers on a table in an empty house. I do not know anything about running a ranch, she said, and it came out more vulnerable than she had intended. I do not know if I can do this. You do not have to do it alone, Cole said. I will help you. The other ranchers will help. This community, we take care of our own, and you are one of us now, whether you decide to stay or not. Why would you help me? You barely know me. Cole smiled, that slow, transforming smile that made something warm bloom in her chest. Because your aunt helped me when I needed it most. Because I believe in paying debts of kindness forward, and because, he paused, his eyes searching hers, because I would like to get to know you, Eliza Montgomery. I would like that very much. No one had said her name like that before, with such careful reverence, as if it were something precious. Eliza felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by something she did not fully understand, something that had nothing to do with logic or sense, and everything to do with the way her heart was pounding, and her skin was tingling, and the world seemed to have narrowed down to just this man, this moment, this possibility. The spell broke when they heard the sound of horses approaching outside. Cole stepped back, his hand dropping to his gun belt in an instinctive gesture that reminded Eliza that this was still the wild frontier, still a place where danger could appear at any moment. Stay here, he said, moving toward the door. But Eliza followed him anyway, stepping out onto the porch to see 3 riders coming up the path. They were not bandits, she saw with relief. These men wore badges pinned to their vests, and the one in the lead had a weathered face that spoke of long years and hard experience. Cole Harrison, the man said, dismounting. Heard you had some trouble with bandits yesterday. Sheriff Garrett, Cole acknowledged. We managed to run them off. No one was hurt. The sheriff's gaze moved to Eliza, his expression curious. You must be Margaret Montgomery's niece. Welcome to Redemption Springs, Miss Montgomery. I am sorry about your aunt. She was a remarkable woman. Thank you, Eliza said. Everyone has been very kind. We are here to have a look around, if you do not mind, Sheriff Garrett said. Those bandits you encountered, they have been causing trouble up and down the territory for months now. We think they might have a hideout somewhere in the hills near here. Your aunt's ranch has been empty, which makes it a potential target. The thought of bandits using her property made Eliza's stomach clench. Of course. See, she said, Asida. Do whatever you need to do. The sheriff and his deputies spent the next hour searching the outbuildings in the surrounding area while Cole and Eliza watched from the porch. They found no sign of the bandits, but Sheriff Garrett warned them to be vigilant. You will need to hire some hands if you plan to stay, he told Eliza. A woman alone out here, even with neighbors like Cole nearby, is vulnerable. And until we catch those bandits, everyone needs to be extra careful. After the sheriff left, Cole and Eliza spent the rest of the day going through the house and the ranch buildings. Margaret had kept meticulous records, and Eliza pored over the ledgers, trying to make sense of the finances. The ranch was not in bad shape, but it needed work and attention. There were fences to mend, stock to check, equipment to repair. The task ahead of her seemed monumental, impossible. "I do not know if I can do this," she said again, sitting at the kitchen table with the ledgers spread before her. "It is so much more than I expected." Cole pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his long legs stretched out beneath the table. "Let me tell you something your aunt told me when I was feeling overwhelmed," he said. "She said that the desert teaches you to take things one day at a time. You do not worry about next month's rain or last year's drought. You focus on today, on what needs to be done right now, and you trust that if you keep showing up, keep doing the work, things will somehow turn out." Did it work for you? I am still here, am I not? Still fighting to make the lazy H into something worth having. Cole leaned forward, his eyes intense. "And I will be honest with you, Eliza. There are days when it is hard, when I wonder if I am just fooling myself. But then I watch the sunrise over the mountains, or I see a new foal take its first steps, or I sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and watch the stars come out, and I remember why I chose this life. Because it is mine. Because I am building something that matters." Eliza studied him, this man who had appeared so suddenly in her life, and who seemed determined to show her that she could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. "Will you help me find ranch hands?" she asked. "People I can trust?" "I have some names in mind," Cole said. "Good men who knew your aunt and respected her. They would be glad to work the double M again." Over the next 2 weeks, Eliza threw herself into learning everything she could about running the ranch. Cole was there every day, teaching her, guiding her, showing her the 1,000 small things that made the difference between success and failure. He taught her how to check the water sources, how to spot signs of illness in the livestock, how to read the weather in the shape of the clouds and the behavior of the animals. He introduced her to the ranch hands he had hired. Tom, a grizzled veteran of the frontier; Miguel, a young man with a quick smile and a gift for working with horses; and Old Pete, who had worked for Margaret before her death and who cried when he saw Eliza for the first time. "You look just like her when she was your age," Pete said, wiping his eyes with a bandana. "It is like having her back, in a way." Eliza learned that her aunt had been more than just a rancher. She had been a teacher, a friend, a source of support for anyone who needed it. People came by the ranch with stories about how Margaret had helped them through hard times, had lent them money or supplies, or simply offered a sympathetic ear. It became clear that Margaret had been the glue that held the community together, and her absence had left a hole that people were still trying to fill. And through it all, Cole was there. He was patient when Eliza made mistakes, encouraging when she doubted herself, and increasingly present in a way that had nothing to do with ranch work and everything to do with the way his eyes lingered on her face, the way he found excuses to touch her hand or stand close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Eliza knew she was falling for him. It was impossible not to, spending every day in his company, watching the way he moved with such easy confidence, listening to the deep timbre of his voice, seeing the kindness and strength that defined him. But she was also terrified because falling in love with Cole Harrison meant committing to this life, this place, this wild and beautiful and unforgiving land. One evening, 3 weeks after her arrival, Cole invited her to dinner at the Lazy H. Eliza dressed with more care than usual, choosing a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and rode over as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Cole's ranch was smaller than the Double M, but immaculately maintained. Everything was in its place, from the neat corrals to the well-tended garden behind the house. Cole met her at the door, and she noticed that he had cleaned up too, trading his usual dusty work clothes for a fresh shirt and trousers. "Come in," he said, and there was something nervous in his manner that made Eliza's heart skip. The inside of the house was surprisingly cozy, with handmade furniture and bright woven rugs on the floor. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the smell of roasting meat filled the air. Cole had set the table with care, and in the center, in a glass vase, were fresh wildflowers. "You kept the tradition," Eliza said, touching one of the delicate petals. "I told you it seemed wrong to have an empty table," Cole said. He pulled out a chair for her, and they sat down to a meal of beef and potatoes and fresh bread. It was simple food, but delicious, and Eliza found herself relaxing as they talked about the day, about the ranches, about nothing and everything. "I want to tell you something," Cole said when the meal was finished and they had moved to sit by the fire. "Something about why I keep those flowers on the table." Eliza waited, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating faster. "When I came here 6 years ago, I was running from something," Cole said, staring into the flames. "My father was a hard man, a violent man. He drank, and when he drank, he used his fists. My mother died when I was young, and after that, there was no one to stop him. I left home at 16 and never looked back. I worked every job I could find, moving from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots." He paused, and Eliza saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. "Then I came here, to Redemption Springs, and I met your aunt. She hired me to work the Double M for a season, and she saw through all the walls I had built up. She told me that running was not the same as healing, that if I wanted to make something of my life, I had to stop long enough to let myself grow." "She was wise," Eliza said softly. "She was, and she taught me that even the smallest acts of beauty matter. She said that putting flowers on the table was her way of choosing hope over despair, of insisting that life could be lovely even when it was hard. After she died, I kept doing it because it felt like a way of honoring her memory. But it also became something else." Cole turned to look at Eliza, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her breath catch. "It became a promise to myself that I would not give up on the possibility of something good, something real, that I would keep hoping someone would come into my life who would understand why those flowers mattered." "Cole," Eliza whispered, and she did not know what else to say. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle despite the calluses. "I know it is too soon. I know you have only been here a few weeks, and you're still figuring out whether you even want to stay, but I need you to know that I care about you, Eliza, more than I have cared about anyone in a long time. You make me want to be better, to build something that lasts. And if you decide to go back to Boston, I will understand, but I hope you will stay. I hope you will give this place and me a chance." Eliza looked at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was tracing small circles on her palm, and felt something inside her shift and settle into place. "I am not going back to Boston," she said, and the words felt like a vow. "I am staying. This ranch, this community, this life, it is what I want. And you," she met his eyes, saw the hope blazing there. "You are what I want too." Cole's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and sweet that it made her want to cry. "I am glad," he said. "I am so glad." They sat by the fire for hours, talking and laughing and slowly, carefully, learning the shape of each other's dreams. When it grew late and Eliza said she should return to the Double M, Cole insisted on riding back with her, unwilling to let her travel alone in the dark. At the door of her ranch house, under a sky full of stars, Cole kissed her for the first time. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and questioning, and Eliza answered by wrapping her arms around his neck and pulling him closer. He tasted like coffee and wood smoke, and when he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "I will see you tomorrow," Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. "Tomorrow," Eliza agreed, and watched him ride away into the darkness. The next months were some of the happiest of Eliza's life. She and Cole were together constantly, working side by side to improve both ranches, learning the rhythms of each other's lives. The community accepted her fully now, no longer seeing her as an outsider from Boston, but as one of their own. She joined the church, helped organize a school for the children, and became known for her kindness and determination. But their happiness was not without challenges. In early autumn, a drought hit the territory, and water became scarce. Eliza and Cole had to make hard decisions about which stock to keep and which to sell, about how to stretch resources that were already thin. There were nights when Eliza lay awake worrying about money, about whether she had made a terrible mistake in trying to run the ranch, about whether she was strong enough for this life. And then the bandits came back. It happened on a Tuesday morning when most of the ranch hands were out checking the water sources in the far pastures. Eliza was in the barn, mucking out stalls, when she heard the sound of horses approaching fast. She looked up to see 5 riders bearing down on the ranch, their faces covered, their guns drawn. Her first instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to go. She grabbed a pitchfork, knowing it was useless against bullets, but needing to have something in her hands. The riders surrounded the barn, and the one in the lead dismounted and walked toward her with a swagger that made her stomach turn. "Well, well," he said, his voice muffled by the bandana. "The new owner of the Double M. We heard you were a pretty little thing from back east. Seems like you need to learn how things work out here." "Get off my property," Eliza said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your property? Lady, this is our territory. Every ranch pays us for protection. Your aunt, she understood that. She paid up every month, and we left her alone." Eliza's mind raced. Margaret had never mentioned paying protection money in any of her ledgers. This man was lying, trying to intimidate her. "I do not believe you," she said. "My aunt would never have paid bandits." The man's eyes narrowed above the bandana. "Then maybe your aunt was not as smart as people said. Maybe that is why she is dead." Rage flooded through Eliza, hot and bright. "Do not talk about her. Do not you dare." The man moved faster than she expected, grabbing the pitchfork and wrenching it from her hands. He pushed her back against the barn wall, his forearm across her throat, not quite choking her, but close enough to make breathing difficult. "Listen to me carefully," he hissed. "You will pay us $500 a month or bad things will start happening. Fences will break, stock will disappear, fires will start, and maybe, just maybe, you will have an accident. Do you understand?" Before Eliza could answer, before she could even think about what to do, there was a shout from outside the barn. The bandit spun around, releasing her, and Eliza saw Cole riding toward them at a full gallop, his rifle in his hands. "Let her go!" Cole shouted, and there was murder in his voice. The bandits scattered to their horses, but Cole was already firing, his shots precise and controlled. One of the bandits cried out and clutched his arm. Another's horse reared and threw its rider. The leader vaulted into his saddle and kicked his horse into a run, and the others followed, fleeing back toward the hills with Cole in pursuit. Eliza sank to the ground, her legs shaking too badly to hold her up. She pressed her hand to her throat where the bandit had held her, feeling the bruises already forming. When Cole returned 20 minutes later, having lost the bandits in the maze of canyons, he found her still sitting there, tears streaming down her face. "Eliza," he said, dropping from his horse and pulling her into his arms. "God, Eliza, I am so sorry. I should have been here. I should have protected you." "It is not your fault," she managed, clinging to him. "You could not have known." But Cole was not listening. He held her tighter, his face buried in her hair, and she could feel him trembling. "I cannot lose you," he said, his voice breaking. "I cannot. You are everything to me. Everything." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the dusty barn while the horses shifted in their stalls and the sun climbed higher in the sky. When they finally pulled apart, Cole's eyes were red-rimmed and fierce. "We are going to end this," he said. "We are going to find those bandits and make sure they never threaten you or anyone else again." Over the next week, Cole organized a group of ranchers and townspeople to hunt down the bandits. Sheriff Garrett led the effort, and Eliza insisted on going with them despite Cole's protests. She had a right to face the men who had threatened her, she argued, and she was not going to hide at home like a fragile flower. They tracked the bandits to a canyon about 20 miles from Redemption Springs, a place where the rock walls created natural fortifications. It was a tense standoff, with the bandits holed up in a cave and the posse spread out among the rocks above. Sheriff Garrett tried to negotiate a surrender, but the bandits refused, and gunfire erupted. The fight lasted most of an afternoon. Eliza stayed behind cover as Cole had made her promise, but she could see everything, could hear the shouts and the screams and the awful sound of bullets hitting flesh. 2 of the bandits were killed and 3 surrendered when they realized they were outnumbered and outgunned. The leader, the man who had threatened Eliza, tried to make a run for it and was shot by Cole as he emerged from the cave. In the aftermath, as the posse was tying up the surviving bandits and tending to their own wounded, Eliza stood at the edge of the canyon and looked out at the vast expanse of desert. She felt hollowed out, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. She had wanted adventure, had wanted to escape the constrained life she had known in Boston, but she had not fully understood the price of freedom in a place as wild and unforgiving as the Arizona Territory. Cole found her there, his face streaked with dust and sweat. "Are you all right?" he asked. I do not know," Eliza said honestly. "I keep thinking about what could have happened. If you had not arrived when you did, if things had gone differently." "But they did not," Cole said firmly. He took her hands in his, forcing her to look at him. "You are safe. The bandits are caught or dead. It is over." "Is it? Will there not just be more bandits, more threats, more violence?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "I will not lie to you, Eliza. This is a hard land, and there will always be challenges. But we face them together. You and me, the community, everyone who has chosen to make a life here. We protect each other. That is how we survive." Eliza nodded slowly. She thought about her aunt, about Margaret, who had lived here for decades, who had faced all of this and more and had still found a way to keep Wildflowers on her table. It was a kind of defiance, she realized, a refusal to let the harshness of life destroy the capacity for beauty and joy. "I want to go home," she said. "I want to go back to the Double M." They rode back together as the sun set, turning the sky into a tapestry of colors. When they reached the ranch, Eliza went straight to the kitchen and stood looking at the table where Cole had placed fresh wildflowers that morning before everything had happened. They were still there, still bright and alive, a small miracle of color in a world that could be so dark. She picked up the vase and carried it outside to where Cole was unsaddling the horses. "Thank you," she said, "for the flowers, for everything." Cole turned to her, his eyes searching her face. "Eliza, I need to ask you something." "What is it?" He set down the saddle and came to stand in front of her, taking the vase from her hands and setting it carefully on the porch railing. Then he took both her hands in his and dropped to one knee in the dust. "Cole, what are you—" "Marry me," he said, and his voice was urgent, almost desperate. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I also know that I love you more than I have ever loved anything or anyone. I know that I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I know that I want to build a life with you, raise children with you, grow old with you. So please, Eliza Montgomery, will you marry me?" Eliza looked down at him, at this strong, brave, gentle man who had saved her life and taught her how to live, who had kept putting wildflowers on a table in an empty house because he believed in hope and beauty and the possibility of love. Her answer rose up from the deepest part of her, from a place that had been waiting her entire life to feel this certain about something. "Yes," she said, and she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Cole Harrison, I will marry you." He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers and said, "I do not have a ring. I did not plan this. I just knew after today that I could not wait another moment to ask you." "I do not need a ring," Eliza said. "I just need you." They were married 3 weeks later in the little church in Redemption Springs with the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Chen made Eliza's dress, a simple but elegant creation of white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Tom and Miguel and Old Pete stood up as groomsmen, and Mrs. Chen served as Eliza's matron of honor. The church was decorated with wildflowers, armfuls of them picked from the meadows and arranged in jars and vases and milk bottles. Cole wore a new suit that he had ordered from the general store, and when Eliza walked down the aisle on Old Pete's arm, she saw tears shining in Cole's eyes. They spoke their vows in front of God and the community, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever hardships and joys lay ahead. At the reception held in the town square, people danced and ate and celebrated late into the night. Sheriff Garrett made a toast, saying that Margaret Montgomery would have been proud to see her niece so happy. Mrs. Chen cried into her handkerchief and proclaimed that she had known from the moment she saw them together that they were meant to be. And Old Pete pulled Eliza aside and told her that her aunt had predicted this, had said in the weeks before her death that she had a feeling Eliza would come to claim the ranch and would find love in the process. She said Cole was a good man, one of the best, Pete said. She hoped you two would find each other. She said you were both so similar, both running from something, both needing a place to belong. She wanted you to have what she never had, a partner to share the burden and the joy. Eliza hugged the old man, understanding in that moment that her aunt had orchestrated this in some cosmic way, had brought her and Cole together across distance and time because she believed they could save each other. That night in the house at the Lazy H that was now their home, Cole carried Eliza over the threshold and set her down gently in the parlor. The wildflowers were there on the table, as always, and Eliza went to them and touched the petals softly. "We will always have these," she said, "a reminder of how we started." "A reminder of hope," Cole agreed, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist, "and of your aunt, who taught me what it means to build a life that matters." They made love for the first time that night, tenderly and slowly, learning the landscape of each other's bodies with the same care they had used to learn the land. Afterward, lying tangled together in the sheets, Eliza felt a sense of peace that she had never experienced before. This was where she belonged, who she was meant to be. Not a society lady in Boston, but a rancher's wife in the Arizona territory, a woman who had found the courage to claim her inheritance and her happiness. The years that followed were full and rich, though not without challenges. Eliza and Cole worked side by side, combining the double M and the Lazy H into one large operation that became one of the most successful ranches in the territory. They weathered droughts and floods, economic downturns, and personal losses. They hired more hands, built new structures, expanded their herds, and they built a family. Their first child, a son they named James after Cole's grandfather, was born 2 years after their wedding. Eliza labored for 14 hours with Mrs. Chen and the doctor in attendance, and Cole pacing frantically outside. When the baby finally came, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Cole cried as he held his son for the first time. "He is beautiful," Cole said, his voice choked with emotion. "He is perfect, just like his mother." "He has your eyes," Eliza said, exhausted but glowing with happiness. "And I think he is going to have your stubborn streak too." James was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Margaret, after Eliza's aunt. Little Margaret was quiet and observant, where James was loud and adventurous, and she loved nothing more than picking wildflowers with her mother and arranging them in vases throughout the house. "She has her great-aunt's spirit," Cole said one day, watching Margaret carefully place flowers on the kitchen table. That same insistence that beauty matters, even in hard times. Their third child, another son they named Thomas, arrived 3 years after Margaret. He was the wild one, always climbing, always exploring, always getting into trouble. Eliza spent half her time chasing after him, making sure he did not fall out of trees or get trampled by horses or wander off into the desert. Through it all, Cole and Eliza's love deepened and matured. They had their arguments, of course, moments of frustration and misunderstanding. But they always came back to each other, always remembered the promises they had made in that little church. always found their way back to the connection that had been forged in the heat and dust of their first meeting. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole surprised Eliza with a trip to the canyon, where he had first put wildflowers on Margaret's table. They rode out together at sunrise, leaving the children with Mrs. Chen, and sat on a blanket overlooking the valley as the sun painted the rocks in shades of gold and crimson. "I have been thinking," Cole said, pouring coffee from a thermos into tin cups, "about that day you arrived on the stagecoach when the bandits attacked. I almost did not go riding that direction. I had planned to check the northern fence line, but something made me change my mind, some instinct I could not explain, and I found you." "Fate," Eliza said, leaning against his shoulder, "or divine providence, or just the universe aligning in our favor for once." "Whatever it was, I am grateful," Cole said. He set down his coffee and pulled something from his pocket. "I never did give you a proper engagement ring. I want to rectify that now." He opened a small velvet box to reveal a ring with a single diamond. Not large, but beautiful, set in a band of gold. Eliza gasped, her eyes filling with tears. "Cole, you did not have to." "I wanted to," he said, sliding the ring onto her finger beside her wedding band. "I wanted you to have something that shows how much you mean to me, how much these 10 years have meant. You took a chance on me, on this life, and you have never looked back. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible." Eliza kissed him, tasting salt from her tears and the coffee on his lips. "You saved me," she said, "from a life that was suffocating me, from a future that held no joy. You showed me what it means to be truly alive." They spent the day together talking and laughing and remembering. They talked about Margaret, about how much they missed her, and how they tried to honor her memory in the way they lived their lives. They talked about the children, about their hopes and fears for each of them. They talked about the ranch, about their plans for the future, about the legacy they wanted to build. As the sun began to set, Cole stood and offered his hand to Eliza. "Come with me," he said. "I have one more surprise." He led her down a path to a small clearing she had not noticed before. In the center was a newly built structure, a little gazebo made of wood and painted white. And all around it, planted in neat rows, were wildflowers of every color and variety. "I have been working on this for months, Cole said. "I wanted to create a place where we could come, just the two of us, and remember everything we have been through. A place where the wildflowers would always grow no matter what." Eliza walked through the flowers, her fingers trailing over the petals, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "It is perfect," she said. "It is the most perfect thing I have ever seen." They stood in the gazebo as the stars began to appear, holding each other close, and Eliza thought about the journey that had brought them here. She thought about the frightened young woman who had arrived in Redemption Springs with nothing but 2 trunks and a letter. She thought about the lonely cowboy who had kept putting wildflowers on a table in an empty house, hoping against hope that someone would understand. And she thought about the love they had built, strong and true, a love that had weathered storms and drought and danger and had emerged only deeper and more resilient. "I love you," she said. The words inadequate for the enormity of what she felt, but the only ones she had. "I love you too," Cole said. "Every day, more than the day before. Every day, grateful that you walked through that door." They went home as the moon rose, riding side by side through the silver light. And when they reached the ranch, the windows glowed with lamplight and the sound of children's laughter drifted out to greet them. Inside, James and Margaret and Thomas were playing a game with Mrs. Chen, who had stayed late to watch them. The children rushed to hug their parents, talking over each other in their eagerness to share everything they had done that day. Later, after the children were in bed and Mrs. Chen had gone home, Eliza and Cole sat on the porch and looked up at the stars. The wildflowers on the table inside were visible through the window, their colors muted in the lamplight but no less beautiful. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked quietly. "Giving up your life in Boston? Taking on all of this?" Eliza did not even have to think about her answer. "Never," she said, "not for a single moment. This is where I belong. with you, with our children, with this land. This is my home." Cole pulled her closer, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind through the sage. Eliza thought about the girl she had been, so sure she knew what she wanted, so convinced that happiness lay in social position and material comfort. She had been so wrong. Happiness was this right here: a man who loved her unconditionally, children who filled her days with chaos and joy, a piece of land that she had learned to tend and cherish, a community that had embraced her as one of their own. As the years continued to pass, the ranch prospered and grew. James grew into a strong, capable young man who took on more and more responsibility, showing a natural aptitude for ranching that made Cole burst with pride. Margaret became a teacher, opening a school on the ranch property and educating not just her own siblings but the children of the ranch hands and neighboring families. Thomas, true to his adventurous nature, joined the territorial rangers for a few years before coming back to the ranch and settling down with a local girl named Sarah. Eliza and Cole grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with years of sun and wind and laughter, but the love between them never faded. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by time and trials into something unbreakable. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole community came together for a celebration at the ranch. There was music and dancing, food and drink, stories and toasts. James and his wife brought their 2 children, giving Eliza and Cole their first grandchildren. Margaret performed a song she had written especially for the occasion. Thomas and Sarah announced that they were expecting their first child. Sheriff Garrett, now retired and walking with a cane, stood and told the story of the day the bandits had attacked, of how Cole had ridden to Eliza's rescue and how that had been the beginning of the greatest love story he had ever witnessed. Mrs. Chen cried as she always did at celebrations and said that she had known from the very beginning that they were destined for each other. When the party finally wound down and the last guests had gone home, Eliza and Cole walked through the quiet ranch, hand in hand. They stopped at the original house, the one that had been Margaret's, which they had preserved and maintained even though they lived in the larger house Cole had built. "Should we go in?" Cole asked. They had not been inside in several years. When they opened the door, everything was just as they remembered it. The furniture still covered with sheets, the books still on the shelves, and on the kitchen table, in the glass vase, were fresh wildflowers. Eliza turned to Cole in surprise. "You still put flowers here?" Cole smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart 25 years ago. "I never stopped. Even after we moved out, even after all these years, I still come here once a week and put fresh flowers on the table. It is my way of honoring your aunt, of remembering where we started, of keeping the promise I made to myself all those years ago." Eliza felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "What promise?" "That I would never take you for granted. That I would never forget how lucky I am that you walked through that door. That I would always choose hope and beauty, even in hard times, because that is what you taught me. That is what this life has taught me." They stood in the kitchen of the old house, surrounded by memories and wildflowers, and Eliza understood that this was what love looked like after 25 years. Not the passionate urgency of new romance, but this, the quiet dedication, the small acts of remembrance, the choice to honor the past while building the future. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been on their wedding day. "I will love you forever." "And I will love you," Cole said, pulling her into his arms, "for as long as I draw breath and beyond." They left the house and walked back to their own home where their children and grandchildren were waiting. The moon was full, casting silver light across the desert, and in the distance, a coyote howled its lonesome song. But Eliza did not feel lonesome. She felt rich beyond measure, blessed beyond words, grateful beyond expression. The years continued their inexorable march. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with noise and life. James took over more of the day-to-day operations, allowing Cole and Eliza to slow down, to spend their days on the porch watching the sun rise and set, to travel occasionally to see the changing world beyond their valley. But they always came back, always returned to the ranch, to the land that had shaped them, to the wildflowers that still appeared on tables throughout the house, a tradition that their children and grandchildren had adopted, understanding its significance even if they had not lived through its origin. On the morning of their 40th wedding anniversary, Eliza woke to find Cole's side of the bed empty. She rose, concerned, and found him sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him, staring at the vase of wildflowers. "Cole?" she said softly. "What is wrong?" He looked up at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. "Nothing is wrong," he said. "I was just thinking about how far we have come, about that terrified boy who ran away from home with nothing but anger and fear, about the lonely man who kept putting flowers on a table hoping for something he could barely name. And now look at us. Look at what we built." Eliza sat beside him and took his hand, feeling the familiar landscape of calluses and scars, the strength that had never wavered even as age had begun to slow them both down. "We built it together," she said. "That is what matters. Not what we were, but what we became." That evening, their children threw them another party, and this time there were dozens of grandchildren running around, their laughter echoing across the ranch. Eliza and Cole sat in chairs that had been placed in the shade, watching the celebration, holding hands. "Do you remember what you asked me?" Eliza said. "All those years ago when you proposed, you asked me to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night." "I remember," Cole said. "We did it," Eliza said simply. "We made it. 40 years of mornings and nights, and I would not trade a single one." Cole brought her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had done on that first night when they had sat by the fire and he had told her he cared for her. "Neither would I," he said. "You are my home, Eliza Harrison. You always have been." As the sun set on their 40th anniversary, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Eliza thought about her Aunt Margaret, about the woman who had chosen this hard, beautiful life and had somehow known that her niece would follow in her footsteps. She thought about the wildflowers, about what they represented: hope and resilience, beauty in harsh places, the insistence that life could be lovely even when it was difficult. And she thought about Cole, about the cowboy who had kept wildflowers on a table in case she ever came walking through that door. He had been waiting for her without knowing who she was, waiting with a faith that bordered on foolishness, waiting because he believed in the possibility of love and connection and home. She had walked through that door and everything had changed. She had found not just a ranch or an inheritance, but a purpose, a community, a family. She had found the other half of her soul in a man who understood that the smallest gestures could hold the most profound meanings. The years continued to pass, as years do. Cole's health began to decline when he was in his early 70s, his heart not as strong as it once had been. The doctor prescribed rest and medication, but Cole was stubborn, insisting on still riding out to check the cattle, still maintaining the wildflower tradition that had defined so much of their life together. "You need to slow down," Eliza told him, worry making her voice sharp. "Let James handle the ranch work. We have earned the right to rest." "I will rest when I'm dead," Cole said, but he said it with a smile that took the sting out of the words. "I am not ready to stop living yet, Eliza. I am not ready to give up the things that make life worth living." But eventually, even Cole's iron will could not overcome the limitations of his aging body. He spent more time in a chair on the porch, less time in the saddle. Eliza stayed with him, reading aloud from books, telling stories about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who visited regularly, making sure there were always wildflowers on the table where he could see them. "I am sorry," Cole said one day, his voice weak. "I wanted to give you so many more years." "Do not apologize," Eliza said fiercely, taking his hand. "You gave me everything. You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. You loved me truly and completely for more than 4 decades. What more could I possibly want?" "More time," Cole said simply. I always want more time with you." On a spring morning with wildflowers blooming across the meadows and the sky a perfect cloudless blue, Cole Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep. Eliza was beside him holding his hand, and when she realized he was gone, she did not cry. Instead, she sat with him in the silence, feeling the weight of his absence, understanding that a chapter of her life had ended. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire territory. People came from hundreds of miles away to pay their respects to the man who had been a pillar of the community, who had helped so many people, who had built a legacy of kindness and hard work and unwavering integrity. They told stories about Cole, about his generosity and his strength, about the way he had always been willing to lend a hand or offer advice or simply listen when someone needed to talk. And every single person who spoke mentioned the Wildflowers, the tradition that Cole had maintained for more than 40 years. They talked about what it meant, about how it had inspired them to find their own ways of choosing beauty and hope in difficult times. After the funeral, after the crowds had gone home and the house was quiet, Eliza stood in the kitchen and looked at the table. The Wildflowers were there, placed by her granddaughter Margaret, who had been named after her great-aunt and who understood the significance of the tradition. "We will keep doing it, Grandma," young Margaret said, coming to stand beside Eliza. "All of us. We will make sure there are always wildflowers on the table, just like Grandpa did." Eliza hugged her granddaughter, finding comfort in the promise of continuity, in the knowledge that what she and Cole had built would endure beyond their lifetimes. The grief was profound, a physical ache that settled into her bones. There were days when Eliza did not think she could bear it, when the weight of Cole's absence seemed too heavy to carry. But she continued because that was what he would have wanted, because their children and grandchildren needed her, because the ranch needed her. And slowly, over months and then years, the grief transformed. It did not disappear, but it became something she could live with, something that coexisted with joy and gratitude and the memories of all they had shared. Eliza lived for another 12 years after Cole's death, years filled with great-grandchildren and the satisfaction of watching the ranch continue to thrive under James's management. She wrote down the story of how she and Cole had met, how he had kept wildflowers on a table in an empty house, hoping someone would understand. She wanted future generations to know where they had come from, what sacrifices had been made, what love had looked like in the wild frontier of the Arizona Territory. On the morning of her 86th birthday, Eliza woke feeling different somehow, lighter. She rose and dressed with care, then walked slowly through the ranch, visiting all the places that held meaning. The barn, where she had first been threatened by bandits and where Cole had rescued her. The canyon where he had proposed. The original house where Margaret had lived and where the wildflower tradition had begun. At each place, there were flowers. Her family had placed them there, understanding that this day was important, wanting to honor both Eliza and Cole in the way that would mean the most. That evening, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Eliza sat in her favorite chair on the porch and watched the sunset. The sky was magnificent, painted in colors that seemed almost too vivid to be real, and she thought she could feel Cole beside her, his presence as real as it had been in life. "Are you ready?" he seemed to ask, and she smiled. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I am ready." She closed her eyes and let herself drift, and when her family found her an hour later, she was gone. A peaceful expression on her face, her hands folded in her lap. They buried her next to Cole on a hill overlooking the ranch under a sky full of stars. And on both their graves, the family planted wildflowers, hundreds of them, so that every spring the hillside would burst into color, a living memorial to a love that had transcended time and hardship and death itself. Years passed, then decades. The ranch continued, passed down through generations. The wildflower tradition persisted, adapted, evolved. Great-great-grandchildren who had never met Cole and Eliza still placed flowers on tables throughout the house, still told the story of the cowboy who had kept wildflowers on a table in case someone came walking through the door, and the woman from Boston who had been brave enough to claim her inheritance and her happiness. The original house, Margaret's house, was preserved as a kind of shrine. Visitors came from all over to see it, to stand in the kitchen and look at the table where it had all begun, to hear the story of faith and hope and love that had defined two lives and shaped a community. And always, always, there were wildflowers on the table. Fresh ones replaced weekly a tradition that had outlasted its originators but had never lost its meaning. They were a reminder that beauty matters, that hope is worth holding on to, that love can bloom even in the harshest desert if it is tended with care and patience and unwavering faith. The story of Cole and Eliza Harrison became legend in the territory, told and retold around campfires and dinner tables, adapted into songs and stories, preserved in family histories and local lore. It was a story about courage and second chances, about finding home in unexpected places, about the transformative power of love, but more than anything, it was a story about wildflowers on a table in an empty house, and the faith it took to keep placing them there day after day, week after week, year after year, believing that someday, somehow, the right person would walk through that door and understand what they meant. And she had. Eliza had walked through that door. And in doing so, she had found not just a house or a ranch, but a destiny, a love story for the ages, a life that had meaning and purpose and joy beyond anything she could have imagined sitting in her mother's parlor in Boston all those years ago. The wildflowers remained, a living testament to the enduring power of hope, a symbol of the love that had been built on faith and watered with dedication, a reminder that even in the wild, unforgiving frontier of the Old West, beauty could thrive if someone cared enough to nurture it. And in the end, that was the legacy that Cole and Eliza left behind. Not just land or wealth, or even the many children and grandchildren who carried their names and their stories into the future, but the simple, profound understanding that life is made meaningful by the smallest gestures of love, by the daily choice to create beauty, by the faith to keep placing wildflowers on a table, believing that someday someone will come walking through that door who will see them and understand everything they represent.